All right, welcome back to the show. I'm Great Grandpa BB. Glad to be out on the farm today with my good friend Steve Larson. I've known Steve for a while. He's traveled across the country on a bike and did a lot of farming stuff. Sneaked me into a Arabic class once, and a musician, fellow musician. I think that's how I met you originally, actually.
Yeah, no, I think so.
Yeah.
Good old Kent days.
Yeah, right, for sure. So we're on a permaculture farm right now. It's called Living Farms, is that right?
Living City Farms.
Living City Farms. Okay. And so, and this is a permaculture, facility, right? Or
I would say it's definitely has inspirations from permaculture.
okay.
I don't know, it's super easy to get lost in words and definitions and things like that, but
Right,
I think in
yeah.
essence what permaculture tries to get at is what we're also trying to do, but also gaining inspiration from a lot of different places as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was always really curious about all that, as far as, because there's agriculture. I mean, there's just, you're growing food from the ground, right?
Right, yeah.
Like, that's...
yeah.
What else needs, we've been doing this, humans have been doing this for a really long time,
Yeah.
You got all kinds of different varieties of species out here, of different things, it looks like. Greenhouses, barns, some cattails, like some beehives behind here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty nice little spread, and it's kind of like in the city still, a little bit, right?
So we are currently in Talmadge, Ohio.
Okay.
The farm started in Summit Lake in South Akron, Ohio, so like straight up urban, like maybe a mile or two from downtown Akron. So now we still have things going on there, but this is definitely a suburban area. If you were to shine the camera that way behind these trees, there's a suburban neighborhood, just kind of like cookie cutter houses, green grass. This is kind of like a little oasis in between all of that, which is pretty exciting to be able to be so close to.
Yeah, just people.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of a farm that's out in the country, an hour from the city.
Yeah.
And you're just out in nature, which is great, or just a monocrop field,
right.
And then you have to truck your food all the way into the city. So a big intention that we have with this space is acknowledging our context of being so close to people.
Nice.
And utilizing that as an asset and resource in order to not just provide food for people and be close to where people live and eat, but also be able to invite people back into some sort of a relationship with nature.
Yeah.
Through growing food, through the different seasons, and just trying to be like, hey, humans are also a part of this ecosystem.
Yeah.
We're not separate from it.
Yeah.
And so, like, what does that mean? Because it's easy to say those words, but we're trying to have an example of this is an embodiment of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're completely connected to the earth. Like, we are part of the ecosystem.
Right.
Like, everything that is on this planet or in this solar system is basically what we're made out of,
Totally, yeah.
We're made out of sun, we're made out of the air, we're made out of the water and the land,
Mm-hmm.
And it's not complicated, but it's also, there's nuance, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm coming to find about a lot of things.
Right, yeah. Sometimes I feel like sometimes like when things are kind of crazy, like, I wish things just were a little more black and white just to make it easier.
Yeah.
But I think if that were to be the case, then I'd be like, wait a second, no, like,
yeah,
this sucks. Like, where's the nuance?
Exactly. Yeah, right. Like, it's like a huge learning curve, and that kind of sucks. But like if there wasn't, we would just take advantage, take it for granted more.
Right,
I think maybe too.
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of respect and dignity and satisfaction, I think, probably that stems from a lot of this stuff, like learning it and just relearning it, and it's the journey at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's parallel with so many different fields too, fields. We won't have too many puns, right?
But no, I totally agree, because for me, like, this is what I do as a job, but it's also a part of my personal journey.
Yeah.
And so instead of thinking like I am an expert or want to become an expert and reach this sort of plateau It's like in my mind, that's not even a possibility because there's just always something to learn. And the moment that we start to think that you know it all or are close to knowing it all or even like know a whole lot, just like, and at least in my case, that's when humbling moments come to remind you that you don't. And that having that perspective of being this almost like eternal student. This is the teacher, and this opportunity to just kind of like be at the feet of the teacher all day long is a huge blessing, especially being able to see it as that. And so just like, and even like within the world of permaculture and talking about design, you can't also separate the designer from what's being designed in the landscape. And so it's just like, as farmers, the work that we're doing is also a reflection of us and the landscape. And that landscape is also like reflected in us as well because we're intimately connected with it. The food that we're eating, the microbes that we're breathing in, and the air that we're breathing in. It's just, it's fun to try to sort of visualize that sometimes until you start to learn more about all the like even microscopic connections. And then it starts to get overwhelming. Like, whoa, there's a lot going on. So it's kind of like step back a little bit and just, instead of trying to micromanage every relationship, having more of this holistic stewardship perspective.
Interesting.
Everyone's working together instead of I need to make sure each and every single little part is doing their thing, and if not, you, I don't know, do something.
Then you try something else.
Right.
So that's it must be really, it feels really calming to be here, you know? Like, I like that aspect a lot. It kind of like takes the world and like just lays it out for you. I know, like, if I'm meditating and if I'm in like walking through the woods or if I'm in nature, it's easier for me to kind of ground myself a lot of times. I noticed that when I used to work in my garden when I had one. That's a really, really important aspect of just keeping your mind steady and like, you know, that's really cool. It's a daily chore for a lot of people, I think, you know, and then just having like a natural refuge like this, you know, probably helps out a lot.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And one of the intentions that we have in this space and just what we do as a farm, that like one of our goals has been to be able to take permaculture and these different regenerative ideas and be able to apply it to small scale agriculture. Because when I took my first permaculture design course, you talked about a lot of things as this holistic design methodology, and so it's not just talking about the growing of food. But when you start to focus on the growing of food aspect, there's a lot of techniques that are talked about that work really well in a backyard situation. But if you're trying to be a farmer and make money at it, and even if it's not on a huge scale, because here we maybe have about a half an acre in production, and it'll grow a little bit more than that, but we're not going to be acres upon acres or hundreds of acres. But there's that little niche that we're in that there's always like this lacking component of, well, how do you apply these idealistic ethical principles to an actual system that has to exist within capitalism that doesn't take the negative traits that we associate with capitalism.
It's a hard line to hard needle to thread.
Right, and I do think it's possible, and that's what we're trying to do. But in addition to wanting that component to the work, we want it to be beautiful and be a reflection of that kind of that holism that is a grounding philosophy for us, so that when we enter the space, there is sort of that feeling where there's a change that happens. You're not just in a city or in a farm field that's just all soybeans, and even some vegetable fields that are mainly just focused on production, and working in places like that, the way that they're managed, it just doesn't necessarily feel that good to be in that space. Which for some people it doesn't really matter because they're making money. Right. And there's again nuance within that. But with us wanting to seeing agriculture, this relationship with the earth as a sacred process, sacred relationship, wanting to be able to bring that about as an experience when you're in the space. And so one of the ways that we're trying to do that is finally getting to the point of establishing trees within where we grow our vegetables.
Oh, great,
And so right now we planted 60 small pawpaws this spring, and so eventually they'll be getting probably around 8 to 12 feet tall, But if like
And that has to do with how much shading and how much light those certain plants need.
yeah, so pawpaws can grow in the shade, but they grow taller in the shade because they're searching for light, supposedly.
Okay.
And when in full sun, they can grow shorter, and we can also prune them to keep them at a manageable height.
But you're planting them in the garden itself, though, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's going to provide a kind of a canopy over the garden, right?
Right. Yeah. So we're spacing in a way so that once the trees are mature, we'll still be able to grow things in between them.
Okay.
But it will start to provide more shade and more deflection from the wind.
Oh, okay.
And so
right,
creating more microclimates, because a lot of the things that we grow, especially at this time of the year and in August when it's super hot, the sun just blasting down.
Yeah.
Things can benefit from shade. We can benefit from shade.
Right.
So like for me,
yeah.
from farming, I've probably been working in farming things for the last 10 years. And if you're just day after day in a sun-baked field,
yeah,
it's not that pleasant.
No.
And again, like, it's part of a job, so not everything has to be pleasant.
Right.
But if we can establish systems that allow the experience to be more pleasant, then we can be happier when we're working, be more efficient, and like have that efficiency aspect kind of come through, but not for the sake of efficiency, but for the sake of being a whole being in this space and allowing it to come from that place. Because I like being in the woods. I think a lot of people like being in the woods.
Yeah.
So we can kind of bring some of that into our production.
Nice.
I think, like, I've been dreaming about doing it for a while, and so now we're finally doing it, and so we get to come back in 5 years and see how it works.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So I'm really interested. Let's get to the hard facts now, okay?
Yeah.
I've been noticing some of the microscope slides and things that you've been posting, like there's different microbes. Are those coming from the soil? And like, does that have to do with like? It probably doesn't have to do with the minerals so much as it has to do with the actual like bacteria and things, right?
Yeah. So it's all connected. There are literally microbes everywhere. There's microbes covering our skin and our gut. Yeah. The soil on the leaves of plants, inside of the leaves of plants. They're just they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And so like once I started to learn more about these microbial systems and viewing agriculture from that living lens, because a lot of if you just look at industrial agriculture, it's a lot of chemistry and death.
Okay.
And so
just don't put it stark, you know?
Right, yeah. right. But in a lot of ways, microbes, I think nowadays it's starting to catch on, but before it's just like you think of bacteria or germs and they're bad.
You think of antibiotics,
right?
You think of trying to get rid of them.
Right.
But yeah, I know the more that we learn just even about our own bodies, the more that we learn that like we're made up of like not just human DNA, but like the DNA of all the organisms that like kind of live in coexistence with us. I know. Right.
Yeah, and a lot of like the bacteria and the fungi and all the other organisms in our gut.
Yeah.
Like they're processing a lot of the food that we eat so that we can actually absorb the nutrients. So without them, like we wouldn't exist.
No.
So plants are super similar. Instead of having an internal gut, the plants have their roots.
Yeah.
And so the roots are, if it's a healthy plant, you've got leaves above the ground, catching sunlight, photosynthesis is happening, taking carbon dioxide, or the air, taking that carbon dioxide, using the carbon to build the structure of the plant, but it's also creating liquid carbon that it then pumps out through the roots.
Yeah. Huh.
And that attracts microbes to it, because think of just like liquid sugars seeping out from roots. It's like bacteria, fungi, all these little critters. Like that's a food source for them.
Man, it sounds like you're describing some really cool children's book that I want to read.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I've been able to study with a soil microbiologist named Dr. Lane Ingham, and she likes to talk about it from the standpoint of cakes and cookies.
Fantastic.
Right. So it's like think of these plants are exuding these cakes and cookies into the soil.
Yeah.
And it's attracting these organisms that are eating that. And there's this relationship that's happening where these microbes, she likes to call like bacteria like bags of fertilizer.
Okay.
And so bacteria have one of the highest, it's either the highest or lowest, I forget how they have the hierarchy.
Okay.
But the highest concentration of nitrogen to carbon ratios.
Gotcha.
So it's like a 5-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
So it's just like these little nitrogen bags that are going around.
Yeah.
And they're eating these exudates from the plants, but they're also able to get minerals from the sand, clay, silt particles, organic matter that's in the soil. They sequester them in their body. There's some of these bacteria that the plant actually will kind of just like take in through its root, consume its innards, and then pop it back out.
Okay.
Which is pretty nuts.
Yeah, it is.
And then there's other parts where
it's almost like the plants are carnivorous in a way.
Right, yeah, they're literally eating bacteria.
Yeah, and that's, bacteria are like living beings in a way.
Yeah, single cell organisms.
Yeah, we're just multi-cell organisms. It's not anything crazy.
Right, yeah. And then there's protozoa with the flagellates and amoeba that are literally coming through. They'll graze upon the bacteria, taking the nutrients like a cow or we eat.
Yeah.
And then what happens with the stuff that we don't have a use for?
Right, yeah.
You poop it out.
Yeah.
And so these little organisms are eating the bacteria, then they poop out these plant available nutrients right in where the roots are, and that's feeding the plants.
Yeah, it's like fertilizer on an entirely different scale.
Right, yeah.
In a sense, kind of what we've done since the beginning of agriculture.
Right, yeah. It's partnering with just these natural systems, because if you look into a forest, nobody's out there fertilizing.
Yeah.
There's also not a lot of being removed from that environment either, so agriculture does remove a lot. But when you see plants through this lens of these relationships with microbes, then it's a part of this system where this plant is a crucial component of this system because it's actually feeding the soil.
Okay.
And that soil is built through living plants and photosynthesis, not just through adding things to it. So it's really fascinating.
So from the other aspect then, from the other angle that you were just kind of briefly, alluding to, as far as phosphorus, as far as mycelium, like in the soil, and fungus, I've always heard that fungus in the soil will also bring nutrients to the plant's roots and things.
Yeah. So I think they say I don't know if it's over 90% of plants or a number similar to that have some sort of relationship with mycorrhizal fungi.
Yes.
And so the mycorrhizal is just like it's Latin for root and fungus.
Yeah.
And so it's like I mentioned, like plants roots being able to eat some bacteria then pop them back out. These mycorrhizal hyphae, or like the mycelium, is actually a part of the plant itself.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like this extension of the plant. So when you have this relationship, this fungus is able to have a much larger span of what soil it has access to.
Yeah.
And also secrete enzymes that the plant can't do to solubilize phosphorus and other minerals from the actual soil itself that the plant can't do on its own.
Yeah.
But when it's doing that, it's able to transport it back to the plant so the plant can utilize those nutrients.
Yeah.
So it's through that relationship that plants actually able to be healthier.
So does the plant itself doesn't create the fungus? It's already in the ground, right?
Yes, but so there's a lot of different types of fungi out there, and like two just classes you could talk about are saprophytic fungi.
Oh, yeah.
And mycorrhizal.
Yeah.
The saprophytes are the ones that, like, we've got this old cover crop right here that is, so it's in essence straw.
Yeah.
And so this can get colonized by mycelium. You can see like white web all over it.
Okay.
And so that fungi is actually consuming the cellulose and the carbon in this.
Oh, okay. Breaking it down into
and that's a saprophyte. So that's a decomposer.
Yeah.
The mycorrhizal, and that doesn't associate with plant roots. It takes dead plants and decomposes it.
Okay.
The mycorrhizal fungi.
Those are the roots. Those are the root ones.
Those need an actual living roots in order to be alive. So without like if we just had a bare field out here, the mycorrhizal can't live. And so you can have spores out there, and the spores will germinate when there's a living root there.
Okay.
But if there's no living roots, you don't have living mycorrhizal. So that's why excessive tillage
Yeah.
and excessive use of chemicals
Well,
within industrial agriculture, it nukes.
it kills the fungus.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I've always been really fascinated about this subject. Like, I feel like it's a newer field as far as agriculture is concerned, or the way that we're viewing our ecosystem in general more recently, right? Or is it? How long have people known about this?
So I think that is a nuanced question and
Right.
response. Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
From the standpoint of Western agriculture, I think it's relatively new. At least like the traction the momentum that it's picking up is more, I would say, more recent thing.
Okay.
But
okay.
from the scope of agriculture and humans relating to the land, and maybe not necessarily being able to have the scientific terms for how these relationships are happening, I think people have been partnering with these processes for a very, very long time. That indigenous peoples of the Americas were partnering with processes like that.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, these are ancient relationships that have been utilized within like human food production. And then when industrial agriculture happened, and we took this very binary approach of us being separate from nature, and we're here to dominate nature. When a problem happens, we're here to get rid of that problem,
Right.
and not actually find what the root of it is. Then from that lens, I think it's more of a new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds about right, because it's always existed there, you know, in the the environment that we're growing in. Like, that's always been like a main part of the system, you know. The bacteria that you see on the slides that you're looking at, are you looking for anything in specific, or is it like is it an experiment right now, or like?
So there are like specific things to look for. I took some trainings from that microbiologist that I mentioned, Dr. Lang Ingham, where like her methodology is to use the microscope to do assessments of soil and compost in order to regenerate ecosystems. Which is super cool. I haven't had the best experience of it actually doing the things that it was supposed to do. And so I'm now utilizing as a part of my toolkit with a lot of other things. But I do use it just to kind of assess generally what's going on with the microbes in the soil.
Yeah, maybe even like the health of the field in a way.
Yeah. So instead of like actually counting microbes like she teaches how to do, I just kind of want to get an overview of who's there.
Right.
And so
Interesting.
You can tell with bacteria, you can see the bacteria, and there's different morphologies of them. But I also look for the higher organisms, or the organisms that eat the bacteria, like protozoa and nematodes and the fungi. So in a healthy ecosystem, especially for what we're looking to create and regenerate here with growing our vegetables, we want to just see a diversity of a lot of these organisms. So if I look at a soil sample and I just see bacteria and a lot of just like silt or soil particles that aren't aggregated that well, then that's showing me that this is a pretty early succession in the realm of ecosystems, and that is not the environment that grows the plants that I'm trying to grow.
Gotcha.
And so what I want to see is a diversity of these protozoa and the flagellates, amoeba, different types of nematodes. Nematodes in agriculture sometimes have a bad name because they can be a pretty...
Don't they sound really weird in the fields? Is that something?
Yeah, I mean, well...
Cicadas, maybe I'm thinking.
Maybe cicadas. Well, usually, like when in conventional agriculture, when you hear nematode or nematode, it's usually a parasitic organism that's attacking the roots of a plant and causes a lot of crop damage all over the world. But like anything in the world, it's nuanced.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, or it has uses.
There's a lot of different types of nematodes. And so these root feeders are one type of nematode, and under the microscope you literally see the spear with these two knobs at the end of it that it uses to puncture the roots.
Wow, yeah.
So by looking at it, you'd be like, that's a root feeder, that could be causing damage.
Yeah.
But if you have another nematode that you can see that it doesn't have that spear, but it has this little tooth,
Yeah.
That
yeah.
nematode eats that nematode. And you're like, all right, well, maybe I've got more of an ecosystem starting to happen.
I love just seeing the cartoons in my mind
Right.
and the painting with it.
Yeah. And then you've got other nematodes where their mouth parts, they look different, and with their esophagus, and those eat primarily bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got other ones, they've got spears, but not these knobs.
Yeah, yeah.
Those eat fungi, so they use their spear to go into the fungal hyphae and extract nutrients and food.
Yeah.
And those are all nematodes that we want to see. So if we're seeing all of these happen,
yeah.
then that's showing us that we have a more diverse environment.
Huh.
And nematodes in particular, if you've got a lot of disturbance that happens, they either like get killed or they just like skedatter and they disappear.
This is wild, man. This is like this is entirely new subject to me now. Like,
Yeah. So that's like, for me, when I started to learn about that, like it was kind of with my spiritual life and like seeking this divinity within myself,
mm-hmm.
and almost wanting to reject the outside world. It's just like the divine was manifesting in front of me through the material world, where it's like, this isn't something that's not divine. Like all these relationships are so interconnected, and it's just awe-inspiring.
Like the philosophy of going inside doesn't just mean your mind, you know?
Right.
Like in the sense of like all early religions, they said that all the material world was the spirit in a sense, right?
Right, yeah.
And so being able to even see it, like what's crazy to me, just like the way that you're describing these nematodes with their spears and their teeth and things, I'm just like we like as humans, we're like, oh well, early Homo sapiens invented spears around this time. It's
right,
like,
right.
Well, they probably existed for a long time in nature.
Right, yeah, right.
I mean, just look at your own teeth and you can see a spear like formed in a sense, you know?
Right, yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm just gonna make a tooth and put it on a stick.
Right, yeah.
I mean, we're just taking shapes and forms from our environment and just reworking them, you know?
Right.
I've always said in a really dumb metaphor of mine, like just to like baseline, what is a job? It's like, okay, well, I take this thing and I bring it over here. And that's every job in the world.
Yeah. Right. But I feel like articulating that there's these patterns that have always existed that we just utilize in different ways. For me, that's another example of how we're not separate from nature, from the environment, from the ecosystem, because we utilize these patterns that are just there. They exist, and we're not separate from them.
No, not at all. Like we're like literally a part of them, like happening. Like
right.
And to take that analogy of moving one thing over here, it's like ones and zeros in a computer program. You know, you get a couple billion of this over here, and then a whole pattern emerges. You know, exactly like what you're saying. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. I like. Let's move more to what we were talking about earlier. Okay. When you're talking about, okay, we're basically in the middle of a city right now. We're in Talmadge, but we're just like a stone's throw from Akron right now.
Right, yeah.
This is an amazing space. I imagine this field is probably utilized in different capacities, different seasons, and things like that. Don't answer yet. And so, but what I'm thinking, you know, like, do you have like programs where you bring people out here, or do you have like music events ever out here, or do you like, you know, because we have brought power out into this field now.
That is true.
We have proven that that's possible.
You're right. Yeah.
That's always in my mind. Where can we throw a show? Like, where can we put a band at? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating. So, to answer that question, before I answer that, this space a little over a year ago was an overgrown horse pasture that hadn't been really touched for at least 8 to 10 years.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
So the camera can't see it, but if you were to look to the back of what appears to be the property and seeing the small trees, to some extent that was all the way to where the gardens are, and then this section was kind of like the goldenrod on the other side, and brambles and things like that. And so we're just now getting this going. This is the first year of actually growing food here. Okay.
Okay.
So it's just in its infancy.
Yeah.
But we do want it to be a space to invite people back into relationship with nature, where food comes from, and in a lot of different ways. And we're just now starting to, as we get this going, try to think of different ways to do so. And now that COVID is kind of not like it was last year, so like we're able to be next to each other without masks. I can talk to neighbors without being like, should I be semi-close to you? Am I allowed to be around you? Should I cover my face? So now that like that realm is opening up,
so hopefully by next year we'll start rounding that curve a little bit more confidently. For sure.
But music is not something that I've ever thought about, which is the nice thing about inviting people into the space, because new ideas come about. And so in the future, as in this year as well, we're wanting to do more farm tours, just to literally bring people into the space. Want to be able to do workshops as well, to talk about what we're doing, because what we've been working on the past 5 or so years in the city, in the small space that we've had, is trying to find ways to grow vegetables that are actually regenerating the soil, minimizing soil disturbance. In the permaculture world, and even just like agriculture as a whole, annual vegetables kind of get this bad rep as being degrading to the ecosystem. So it's like you grow corn, you're mining that soil and you're taking so much nutrients, and by that corn growing, it's seen as leaving that soil in a worse off place than at the beginning.
Like you're depleting it.
Right, and so we're trying to reverse that narrative and saying that each plant is actually a force of regeneration on its own. And that process that I mentioned with the photosynthesis happening and feeding of soil microbes, that liquid carbon that's being fed is liquid carbon. So that's carbon that was in the atmosphere that we have too much of. And it's bringing it into the soil. And it becomes a part of a carbon cycle, so it's not just being sequestered completely into the soil. Some of it is, but it's increasing organic matter and life and water infiltration. So if we're actually stewarding these plants as I think they were designed, we can utilize that relationship as a force of regeneration, not degeneration.
And that's an important thing to remember too, when we are possibly, and this is kind of like projection, but like if, like let's say like 10, 20 years from now, we harness like fusion, or we harness some kind of like energy that's renewable, that doesn't create carbon, that we have pretty much an infinite source of energy at that point, right? Will we be able to actually determine the level of carbon in the atmosphere itself using maybe machines to sequester carbon or things like that? But we do have to realize that carbon is completely like life-giving, right? I guess it goes without saying we're carbon-based life forms, right? And all of the plants are as well.
Right, and I think in chemistry, the term organic means having carbon.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so those chemists probably know that, I suppose, but maybe some of the entrepreneurs might not, or like who knows? We're getting into a space where we're really like becoming more powerful beings on the planet. Like, we're really not at all. We think that we're powerful beings on the planet right now, but we're not. Like, we're not in control of any of this.
Right.
Like, everything that we've been doing for the past 200 years since industrial evolution has all just been based on growth and consumption. And just like, okay, have as many kids as you can, and we're just gonna like make as much stuff as possible, and like we're just gonna, like, as long as the economy goes up, that's good, But now we're getting to the point where like, okay, like how resources like
seeing the impacts of that.
On so many different levels. And then we don't know how to create an economy that's based off of sustainability. Like if you're a stockholder, you invest based on how much you're going to get back, how much return you're going to get back. You don't invest based off of like, it's like, well, I'm going to invest in this company because it's going to help all these people, It's like this whole like people first economy almost is what we need to build, because then we'll be like, okay, the Prime Minister of Brazil is clear cutting rainforests to create, cattle and soybeans down there just to
Right.
make a quick buck, even though he's losing money doing that, and he's like, taking out a huge valuable resource in the world to sequester carbon, to like, produce rare and diverse biology and species of plants down there. It's really sickening to think about. But if you're thinking about, okay, well, how are we going to help the people first? That's an entirely different line of thought and a direction to go.
Totally, yeah.
And with all like the next 10 years is going to be wild with AI, with quantum computers, and being able to figure out these enormous mathematical problems that have like eluded us for forever. And then all of the data on top of that. I know even John Deere, like in all the tractors and like big farms, are basically like John Deere has a bigger IT division, like a technology division, than it does anything else now.
Yeah.
And they're like they're trying to decide, okay, who owns the data? It's like, okay, well, the farmers own the data. It's like, okay, but like, do they? Like, there's a lot of questions in that whole world right now too. But as this all unfolds, it's just super important to like go back and just remember, like, we've been doing this for a long time. Everyone was farmers at one point,
Right, yeah. Yeah, and I do think I do get inspiration from what I see happening within the realm of regenerative agriculture, from the standpoint of people trying to find larger scale solutions.
Yeah.
Like, what we're doing is on a pretty small scale, and theoretically, if a lot of people did what we're doing, then it could really add up.
Yeah.
But farming's really hard. It's hard to make money off of it.
Yeah.
And you have to like have a really good drive to do so.
Yeah.
And so this is definitely important what we're doing, but there's also people that are doing it on a larger scale, that are doing it with grazing of animals, that are doing it with growing grains regeneratively, where there's kind of like this shift of our understanding from this black and white paradigm of domination over nature to this place of stewardship, and seeing that if we understand the impacts of our practices, we can actually shift what we're doing and manage the ecosystem for greater health. And I think
like an overall balance. It's like it's way out of balance now, and we're kind of trying to bring it back to where it was almost.
Right, yeah. And so from that standpoint, there's, I think, a lot of room for the sequestration of carbon, so that we don't need to try to create technology to artificially sequester it and pump it into the earth and do things that we don't know what's going to happen when you put a shit ton of carbon into the earth like that.
Yeah.
It's like, think about fracking. What we've done with the fracking water. Like, we've created earthquakes by injecting water deep into the earth and removing it from the water cycle. And so it's like that sort of thinking, I don't think is what we need to get us out of the problems that we're in.
It's a lot more. The earth is a lot more fragile in ways than we think it is too. It seems so permanent, I think, to a lot of people. We take it for granted, but we're really just on like this like thin crust of like, cooled off surface area. It's like floating on top of like huge magma seas, under our feet. Like, but I mean, you don't think about that on a daily basis.
Right.
Like,
oh yeah.
It's like, oh, we could like break that crust off, It's like, this is a thin crust pizza, man. Like, you ain't gonna shoot that pizza sauce down in there. It's not gonna be a stuffed crust pizza, no matter what you do, man.
Right.
Like,
yeah. And I do agree, but I think the earth is also this super resilient organism. That, like, for instance, if we're sequestering carbon using plants instead of this artificial machinery, that's what's happened for billions of years. And when that happens, then the whole system benefits. So it's like, by having more carbon in the ground, then we have soil that has better water, or has better soil structure, which means more water can infiltrate. They throw around a few different numbers, but I think the USDA right now talks about, for every 1% of organic matter increase per acre of land, that's another 20-something thousand gallons of water that can be held in that soil. So we think about just like crazy downfalls of water that create a lot of runoff. If you have your soil organic matter at 1% in degraded ag land, but you can bring it up to 5, 6, 10, 12%, that's a crazy amount of water that you're able to hold there.
Yeah.
And if you're able to hold that water in place, then when a drought comes, you have more resiliency because you have all this water being held into the soil. You're also able to better recharge aquifers in the groundwater.
You're right.
And by having that carbon in the ground, you have more pores and air able to get into the soil, and so more organisms can be in a system that is able to bring about more life.
Yeah,
so
it's
like
more aerated and like
Yeah.
it has more space.
Right.
Like more space for more organisms, more space for life in a way.
Yeah, and there's just like this general pattern that really inspires me in nature where life begets more life. So
Yeah.
so it's this pattern of regeneration. So once you start to bring more life, this carbon starts to come in more, then that's jump-starting the system to be able to grow and grow and grow and grow. Not in the sense that our economy tries to have this exponential growth, but in this successional process where life lives and dies, and through that process, more is able to come into existence.
Yeah, it's a steadier pattern than what we're doing right now. I mean, if we're looking at, I mean, obviously exponential graphs are huge when we're talking about technology and things like that too. And I think a lot of people are realizing that like we all evolve as organisms, you know, but our technology is evolving at a different pace.
Oh yeah.
And we really need to take account for our humanity in that equation too, because our humanity evolves slowly, you know. So if we're like, I know I've read a lot of. I remember Aldous Huxley talking about this back in like the 30s in some of his essays, where he's talking about how technology will like, you know, symbolically break our bones in a sense if we don't like look out for it, you know, like we need to be making, and that's I guess more of the same philosophy I was talking about earlier as far as how the economy is working, because the way that we focus the economy is the way that we're going to focus our technology, right? And so if we're focused towards the humanity side of the technology, we need to focus the economy on the people and making sure that everyone has food, clothing, house, like everything standard, healthcare, just right off the board. Like, as long as we can provide some kind of a platform for people, you know?
Yeah.
That's the best use of technology that there is, I think, you know?
Right, yeah.
Or the economy. I mean, if the economy and technology are so interconnected right now, you know?
Right.
Like, as far as, like, everything is run in the economy, like, all the top companies are all tech companies now, you know? And so in that sense, like, whatever way that goes, you know, like, whatever, and in a sense, whatever becomes popular with people will also, you know, drive that as well. And if people can't keep up with it, they'll just fall away, hopefully, you know. And in a sense, you know, the younger generation will be able to like adapt faster like it always has, and you know, the older generation will have to struggle to keep up. But then that's going to create a whole other market of like, okay, well, what's technology for older people? Like if they can't use this tech, but we still have this whole idea, you know, this whole like, let's say we have like augmented reality or something, you know, where you can't tell, like all our glasses are like maps or like, you know, different. You can see cartoons in your vision and you don't know what reality is anymore. Like, the kids will love it, but then the grown-ups will be like, I'm not used to this. I'm not doing this. You know, But is there still some kind of a use, you know, for that kind of a tech too? I mean, it's all really scary in a way, and it's, I mean, well, how far away are we going to get from our own humanity, you know?
Yeah. And because I think, like, when I hear you saying all of that, the permaculture world and other different kind of holistic methodologies, I feel like they're trying to address that as kind of viewing these things as tools. And currently the framework of utilizing these tools is the pattern that you just described, and it's not very life-giving, other than the fact that it makes certain people money.
Right.
But like within permaculture, they try to ground everything with 3 ethics of caring for the earth, caring for people, and being able to return a surplus back into the system.
That's beautiful.
Holistic management is another methodology of being able to try to better make decisions that encompass a larger whole.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the interconnected web that we exist within. And so I think there's philosophies out there that are trying to bring an impact to the individuals and saying that what really matters is the change of heart and the change of mind, and understanding that when we're making these decisions to create these certain things or to build these certain economies this way, we're not doing it from a place that's grounded in the perspective of the whole. And not saying a lot of these people are going to want to do that.
Yeah.
But I think like what I'm interested in at this moment, and would get a lot of inspiration from people that are trying to figure out within the system that we're currently at, like how do we start to bring more of these holistic methodologies into what we're doing, and have them be successful within the system so that we can keep existing and actually doing this. And who knows if it's actually going to be enough to create some sort of an impact to change the entirety of it. But at least for me right now, I'm like, we got to at least try.
Yeah, because this is kind of fun, man. I like telling stories and playing music and running around and doing podcasts and you know, all the things, man.
Right, yeah.
That's what it's all about. I mean, that's and man, I was watching this thing the other day. They were talking about using mycelium to actually produce a different kind of plastic.
Okay, yeah.
They're using like hemp fibers, and they're growing the mycelium around it, so that they're actually growing. I'm not exactly sure the specifics, but they're growing some type of like plastic out of, like, it's like a growing living plastic, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is really wild. And the thing that got me, like right in the beginning of this video I was watching, the guy's just like, we really got to figure out a way to stop eating so much plastic. And I'm like, oh man, are we at this point right now? He's like, it was something like 0.5 milligrams of plastic every human eats like a week or something like that. Man. And it's like, oh man, yeah, exactly. Like, it's we're at that point, you know, and we really got to take stock. We got to take stock of the coral reefs. We got to take stock of like the whole ecosystem. It's all so interconnected and so just simply complex, right? It's like like we all know it when we say it, and we all know it when we hear it, you know. But it's what we need to do, you know. And there's a lot of work to do, and it's so man, it's so soul crushing just to see all the jobs that we have that we created just for no real reason. Like there's so many jobs and people just doing things like just for money that like are really just made up jobs. They're not even really doing anything all day so much, you know, where they could be just like working in the earth or like you know, in fields. Like 90% of people used to work on farms, you know,
right? And
that's how we all subsisted. Like everyone was self-sustaining, and like everyone knew a little bit of blacksmithing. Everyone knew how to like, you know, like how systems work. How like they looked at the sky and like worried about the weather a little bit, you know, which was probably terrifying. And that, but like we all have pocket computers now. Like we can see like what the weather is.
And weather people that still haven't figured out how to read the weather.
Yeah, exactly. Man, yeah, we got a long way to go. We've come a long way, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I like it out here, man. We got the corn dogs growing out here. Like that's
right.
Just peel the corn off and you got a Slim Jim, man, like all day, man.
Right, yeah, this is our main cash crop right here.
Yeah, so cattails, what, like, you were using this for something in particular, or like?
No, so like I mentioned before, this is a pretty new space for what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So this has always been a wetlands, or by always, I don't know about that, but at least as far back as we can know with the people that have lived here prior to the indigenous peoples here, wetlands were here, and it goes that way as well.
Yeah.
And so currently we're just letting it be. Eventually we might try to dig out more of a pond to be able to capture more water.
I was gonna say, usually swampy areas, you know, that's what I see, you know.
Yeah, but as of right now, I mean, I'm super happy that we have more again, just like talking about farming from an ecosystem perspective, that they're like, this is habitat.
Yeah.
And in some senses, it can bring potentially things that will want to eat what we're growing. But I also know, like, permaculture likes to talk about being able to utilize different microclimates and niches within a space. And so in some regards, people will put small little ponds next to gardens in order to attract toads and frogs and little creatures like that. Will actually like go and hunt for slugs and other creatures in the garden and insects. And so it's just, again, like trying to paint a bigger picture than we're just growing vegetables, but we're trying to steward an ecosystem. Like there's a little bunny rabbit over there next to the fence.
Nice.
Which would definitely like to eat our vegetables. But by having a small electric fence, it allows us to hopefully still exist with these rabbits and keep the deer on that side of the fence. So in some regards, people will just have to trap and hunt and kill these creatures. In certain contexts like that, it has to happen, but we would rather not have to do that. So if we can find a way to coexist with them better, to utilize the resources that we have, it allows this rabbit to still be, and our carrots to still grow.
It's a huge. There's probably so much to know. You know, it's just like the living world itself. You know, have you studied anything as far as like an edible forest? I was always really interested in these types of like things, because in some respect it is exactly what you're saying, where you're trying to balance out this, like, are there predators that are going to eat certain bacteria that are going to affect the balance in the thing, or I mean, am I just going to pick out a bunch of, you know, things that are edible, put them all in a big forest, and then just like watch it naturally, you know, kind of aggregate to itself almost? No, I mean, I'm definitely super interested in that concept. In the permaculture world, they really like to talk a lot about food forests. Within our context of being a farm that needs to generate a profit, a lot of, like, a big problem that happens within the permaculture world is just not necessarily having models that translate well to actually making a living off of the system that you're creating. You can design systems for other people and get paid to do so, and create a job that way, which is cool. But the actual like functioning of that system and stewardship of it to create products to sell, like in a situation like that, you have a lot of random things that could be growing that don't amount to a whole lot, and the efficiency of harvest, it just, like, a lot of it from like a business standpoint is hard to understand how to do, and I haven't really been able to find many examples of how to do it. But what we are trying to do is kind of like take that concept and that pattern and apply it to a production system where we have our tree rows that will eventually have other perennials growing with them, with our vegetables, but doing it within linear rows that are standardized, so that we can plan more efficiently, we can harvest more efficiently, we can plant more efficiently, and so have the benefits of the efficiency of a production farm, but start to bring more of these elements of a natural ecosystem, because I think, like, permaculture, the term was coined by two Australians in the 70s. But a lot of the information they gathered is indigenous knowledge that's been along for a really long time. And the Haudenosaunee people, who had been in this area, I think, but were more primarily in the New York, Pennsylvania area. There's accounts to how they stewarded their ecosystem, where you'd have a woods, and instead of, like, we look over here and it's kind of cluttered, you could say. But they stewarded it where when you're there, it seemed more like a park. And they stewarded this ecosystem to be able to corral deer and this wild game. And so instead of like having fences, raising livestock, pigs within these fences, they can get out of the fence, they run away. They were literally stewarding whole ecosystems where all these creatures were living within this ecosystem, but they were able to
benefit from it and eat from it, have nut crops in the forest and food crops in the forest, deer and all the other animals that you can eat that are in the forest, and then also have their corn, bean and squash fields, and where they grow other fruit trees. And there's this actual whole ecosystem that I think is kind of like, for me, like that's the ideal embodiment of this food forest that was actually used to sustain like whole peoples.
May I interject some left field here real quick?
Yeah.
I suggest using the philosophy of Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory.
Okay, yeah. All right.
In a sense that, like, I think that the whole idea of the edible forest is really popular because in people's minds, it's like they're in a Willy Wonka factory and everything that they're like, oh, I can eat this. I can eat this now. You know, it's like
it's already all at the same time.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
Yeah, it's all really colorful.
It might turn into a blueberry sometimes.
Yeah, it's a mysterious. The term forest for the trees, right? Like, it's a mystery. You don't really know what you're seeing sometimes. And, but and also the whole philosophy of every now and a little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest of men, right? Okay, so get this, like you set up like a whole whatever you're doing and then have like different artists come out here and build little like wooden little markers or things that are kind of colorful that maybe look like candy or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I was also thinking about there's like an herb like the herb garden that's more close to where I live over in Norwalk. I think it's in the Huron area. It's like mulberry something, I think. But they
Chef's Garden?
No, I know what you're talking about though. I've had some friends work there. But this is a different one down the road. But it's strictly like herbs, like a few different greenhouses, and then they have like a really nice little like setup and patio and a shelter house, and then they have like a nice little field next to it where they have like a what do you call it, like a medieval festival kind of a thing. Yeah, and that was always really cool because they were like kind of combining those worlds together.
Fascinating.
And another thing I wanted to suggest, right, as kind of like maybe a revenue source or something. Maybe not like an Airbnb, but maybe like a shelter or something where people could rent out to like just, you know, like have small private parties where you like limit the number of people and things, you know. If people were to do something like that, like even like you know, graduation parties or like maybe not as big as a wedding, you know, because that could get out of hand, I feel like, and you don't want people like running amok, like but I don't know, I mean, like different things for a property or for people who want to have even like yoga or like some kind of like little events like that, like that happen on, I mean, beaches all the time, you know, like yoga on the beach, yoga in the farm or something, you know, like.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. Yeah, and the owner of this property, the house that's behind these cattails is a 1850s farmhouse that over the years had different additions happen to it.
Yeah.
He lived in it for some time. And when he moved out, he eventually started to, there were some issues with the roof, and it was leaking, water got everywhere.
Yeah.
So he started like pulling off all the stuff that got ruined and started to find these like hand cut beams behind the walls.
Oh, okay.
So he's like, all right, we're no longer going to do what we intend to do. We're just going to strip everything and redo the house and try to kind of uplift that 1850s time frame that it was built in. And no one currently lives in the house. Every once in a while someone will be there, but he wants to turn that into kind of like an Airbnb space where people can come stay, be on a farm. If they want to help out, they can, but they just like be able to come stay, even if like you live in Akron, want to come stay there, or you live coming from Washington, from a different country, but this is a place that you can come and stay and then be a part of this environment. So that's an idea that he's had that hopefully we'll be able to do, but I like the idea of bringing other events as well, to invite people into the space, even if it doesn't have to do with farming. It at least gets people here to experience and just be, which is great.
there's a couple more examples I wanted to throw at you while I'm here.
Do any include corn dogs?
Most of them, yeah. Okay, so there's a place called the River Dog, okay? Over in... Oh, okay. That was not intended to work so perfectly. But instead of corn, they have rivers. And so they have like a barn that they throw concerts in, basically.
Okay,
you know?
yeah.
And it's this really nice little space. And they have like another barn adjacent that has like... it's like a whole artist workshop, you know?
Okay.
And they have like... They definitely have their own thing going. It's definitely like its own like vibe of types of art that they have throughout the whole thing that they all do in the back in a workshop, you know. It's just a really cool space. They have I haven't explored the whole thing even, you know.
Yeah.
It's right between Oberlin and Wakeman,
Okay.
over in that space.
Yeah.
But they do a lot of really cool things. I don't know even if they farm or if they grow anything there or not, but they definitely should or could, you know.
Right, yeah.
And then also the commune I was telling you about when I was interviewing Kim Green. If I haven't aired this one yet, this is coming. So me and Kim Green talked about a commune down in North Carolina in the Black Mountain area, and they what I always just like what struck me, like I guess like culture shock wise, you know. And maybe I've just been in too sheltered living in rural Ohio, you know. But like they had like this like little building where they called it the Zendo, and it was like when I walked in, you know, you're walking in and the doors are all just like super quiet, and you're like walking in and there's like people that are just like walking as like slow as humanly possible. Like each step that they take is like taking like it's like kind of for intention, I guess, purposes,
Okay, yeah.
you know. But like people are just walking around in a circle in this room when I walked in.
Like a labyrinth in it, or just an open room?
It's just an open room, yeah.
Oh.
And it was decently small, but big enough for I think about 8 of us or 10 of us to do yoga comfortably in there.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they had that going on, you know, like
Yeah.
that would be an amazing, because it doesn't take up a lot of space. It's just like a little hut, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
That I don't know. It provides a lot of calmness to the people who are coming to it. You know,
Yeah.
like you're building it with like the idea that this whole room is going to be quiet. You know,
Yeah.
very much like I don't know if you would go so far to take care of the acoustics like you would like if you're building like a professional studio like Steve Albini did in Chicago. He built like rooms inside of rooms. And so that there's space all the way around.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you're getting like the actual article. And maybe he did that because he's in a city too, you
Yeah.
know? And he's like probably right downtown. I've never recorded there and I've always wanted to, but like it's just an amazing idea for a space, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're really taking into account the acoustics and like how quiet things are. How natural do you want this space to sound? I think about these things a lot, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. No, with good reason.
But it also provides a certain type of quietude within people, and then just being out here. I mean, we're in a city, and we can hear the birds, you know, at the same
Right.
time.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I mean, even if we were at our farm in Akron,
Mm-hmm.
which is in the middle of the Summit Lake neighborhood, there's a railroad track that goes by it on a busy road.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of factories nearby, a lot of crazy sounds happening, but then
Mm-hmm.
there's birds. You can hear nature. If you're there early in the morning when the city's kind of quiet, you wouldn't know that you're not in a meadow somewhere in the
Yeah.
middle of the wilderness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really great people in cities, and you know, like if you have a higher income, you're more able to
Mhm.
just go take a vacation out to the country, or you know, we're gonna go up to the Hamptons or you know, New Hampshire, or you know,
Yeah.
someplace else that starts with H. I don't know.
Right.
But you know, fancy like nature getaways that people can decompress in, you know. And if it's already in the city, you know, like then it opens it up to more people, and people can like kind of calm down from the traffic and from like I mean, traffic is so hectic to people, just like in general. It's like people get so much stress. Like you're putting yourself in a death-defying position doing that.
Yeah.
You know, like people don't think about it. People just think about, oh, well, this is just how society works, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like really not how society has ever worked before. And it's probably not going to be how society works in 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you know? We're going to have self-driving cars, and I'm going to feel a lot calmer about that situation, honestly, myself. Like it scared me for the first couple years I thought about it, and then I'm like, but then people won't be driving, and I'm like, it made me feel calmer.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that'll be nice. That's probably better. But yeah, I think about transportation a lot, just given that my dad's in the transportation field. He works for like safety in the safety field, you know. So I kind of grew up with like crash test dummies in the living room and like crash test, you know, happening on the TV and the VHS player and stuff, and like just super slow motion. These dummies are like getting in side impact and falling out of the car, and like I'm like, oh no, like I'm like 5 years old, you know, like or something. I don't think about these things, man. And
made you who you are today.
Yeah. Probably fair game. Yeah, and so, you know, I watch these like keynote speakers talking about safety and transportation sometimes for fun. And they're talking about like, well, right now, you know, automated cars are maybe 10 to 20 times safer than human drivers, you know? Mm-hmm. What will it be in 5 years? And then what will the insurance companies say, you know, like about this at that point, you know? Like, are they just gonna like, if like, we're just gonna get subscription services to these vehicles, basically, where we're paying like $5 a month, you know, or $10 a month or something, like just like Netflix, and we're able to just like call a car wherever we are, just pick us up and take us point A to point B, you know?
Yeah.
No parking. You're gonna see all the parking disappear in cities, and then the other part is that since they're all electric, they're gonna be really easy upkeep, maintenance wise. That's why the cost is gonna be so low too, you know? Because it's so much cheaper once you have a fleet of these cars. Like any of these tech companies will be able to do this, and they're all trying to. Daimler Chrysler, Google, you know, Apple, Ford, you name it, across the board, you know. And that's what the goal is, I think, you know, because like after a few of those start, insurance will start increasing on real drivers and things like that. Yeah. And then you won't be able to like afford to drive yourself anymore. Yeah. You know, or I mean, people will still drive themselves, you know, but it's gonna impact the lower class first, and they're just not gonna like think that it's gonna be worth it. I mean, yeah, that's the way cities kind of a lot of the bigger cities, you know, have just taxi services anyway, you know. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm hoping that that's paired with, especially as cities go through renovations and redesign. I feel like there's, I don't know if it's a big push, but there's at least a push to make cities more walkable and more human friendly. Yes. And so to make actually walking places make sense, riding a bike places make sense. When I was traveling across the country after I graduated, I spent maybe about a week in Minneapolis, and at that time it was rated, I think, the most bike friendly city in the US. Wow. And one of the things I was super impressed by was they had this almost like bike highway. It had a special name to it. Yeah. But it literally went across, I think, half the city. Wow. It was kind of like, it wasn't underground, but it was like kind of like down a little ways from the road. And so like you had entrances onto it. You'd go downhill, and it was literally this bike path that went underneath roads, so you didn't have to like wait for traffic. Nice. Worry about getting hit by cars. Yeah. And you could go across half the city, and then there were exits to get up onto the road, so like wherever you're trying to get to. Yeah. And then you'd have businesses that were off that as well, for like coffee shops and things like that. And so it's like making a city more accessible to things that you don't have to be in a vehicle like that if you don't want to. Yeah. And actually like be engaging your body, because I don't know if I'd say it's a fear, but I feel like a pattern that I could see happen in that realm with automating everything is that by removing humans, we're dulling ourselves to like the relationships of actually interacting with the world and the environment around us, and just like allowing everything to happen for us, and we're just further removing ourselves from our place,
from agency in a
right?
way. Yeah.
But again, it's a tool, so I don't think it has to be like that.
No.
I just hope that as humans and we move forward, we try to think about that a little bit more.
Exactly, because I know at least our generation and everyone who's alive right now like knows about driving, and they want to drive still, you know, and they want to be in control of things. And like I think that electric scooters and bicycles and small low-speed vehicles and things like that, I think are going to increase a lot in the next few years because of that. Because people will have their hand on a wheel and be able to zoom around, you know, in a city or out in the country, wherever they're at, and just be in control almost, you know. Because a lot of our freedom, I think, in the United States anyway, is predicated on this idea of like, oh, I'm free to drive anywhere at any time, you know. And if you take that part away, you know, like what's really left, you know? Like, I mean, that's one of the big puzzle pieces, I think, you know. Like we don't, it's not really, it's more of a mental, emotional connection to freedom driving is, you know, for a lot of people. And I think that that's like subconsciously why a lot of people are afraid, and they don't even know it. They don't even know that's why they're afraid of it, of losing that part, you know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
1 second, is that?
It's off. Yeah,
Okay.
if it turned off maybe about 10 minutes ago or something.
Okay,
But
yeah.
this is all going to be on the audio podcast anyway.
All right, cool.
And I figure like if people make it this far on the video, I'm just going to put in pictures of your farm and stuff like that. And
okay, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, that'll work out good. And once I get a better phone here this week,
yeah.
I'll have more control over things again. And
yeah.
But we're slowly. I'm just getting into it. You know, like
no problem at all.
Yeah.
If we're slowly getting to this as well, we got the I don't get freaked out when I look at that barn because I'm used to seeing it every day.
Yeah.
But it's pretty precarious. And I mean, if you were here last year, you can't tell, but the front side of it literally had poison ivy with trunks this thick.
Whoa.
That were growing at least 5 feet taller and beyond the barn. And so it's like this terrifying monster.
I didn't know that poison ivy was a tree.
It's not a tree, but when you have a base like that to act like a tree,
exactly.
and like it'll just it was
take over.
You could say maybe old growth poison ivy.
Right.
But I'm okay with that sort of old growth getting cut down.
Yeah, for real. I mean, man, I would be wearing masks just to try to to saw into something like that, and you're just working up all of the. Yeah. I'm real allergic to poison ivy.
No, I am too. So I was like, I'm not gonna touch it.
Yeah.
We had a retired arborist that used to work for maybe the city of Akron.
Okay.
We got big oak trees over here that needed to get trimmed up, and so he came out to give us a quote on doing the work, and we were walking back and talking. He looked at the poison ivy just like, do you want someone to take that off for you? I was like, yeah. I was like, I'll do it. I was like,
cool.
I don't think I've ever had someone be like, hey, can I remove that poison ivy from you? It's like, for sure. And he did the tree work, and then him and his helper, they chopped it down. They hauled it off site.
Did they use it for something or?
No, they disposed of it somehow.
Oh, okay. They just want to do that, huh?
Yeah, for a job to help us out.
Oh, wow.
I was like, yes, please.
Impressive. Yeah. That's good to hear, man. That's good to hear that people are out there doing real things that are impacting,
removing poison ivy jungles.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that building seems really stable on the inside with the beams, and the concrete blocks, being very, very, very new looking. You know, it seems very sturdy to me.
Yeah, it definitely is now, from the work that has been put into it. And hopefully by the end of the month, we'll have a cooler in there, concrete floor. We can have our wash and pack station.
Oh, right on.
Tool storage and all the things I've been dreaming of having for years now. What else? You're not gonna have.
The dream is slowly evolving and
Right.
coming to the conclusion here. Well, or it never comes to the conclusion,
No,
right?
the
Like,
next succession.
Yeah.
I like to think like with ecosystems, you start if like you go back to the beginning of time with just like bare rock or whatnot, and then
Okay.
slowly soil was built.
Yeah.
Plants start to colonize it, and eventually you get to an old growth forest. Now you
Mhm.
can talk about like bringing in a disturbance, and over time, like more pioneer plants or weedy species, they'll start to grow there,
Mm-hmm.
and then more grasses will come in, more shrubs, perennials, trees. Eventually, you get to that old growth forest.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so again, it's like life forms, living, dying, bringing about more life. So it's like their life brings about a more abundant ecosystem as you get to this old growth forest.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a successional process.
It is.
And so I like to, humans being nature,
Mhm.
I like to try to think how we're a part of a successional process as well, where instead of denying our past, everything is built upon everything. And so it's a successional process. So like
It is.
what's happening with the barn and things with the farm, it's just been this ecosystem succession process that we're a part of.
And going to the patterns I know as a musician, right? I'm constantly like, the music has evolved, and they always talk about music as sessions.
Okay,
Like, you know,
yeah.
we're doing session work or like, you know, kind of thing. You know?
Yeah.
Because I know, I mean, it's so weird to like, I've been so directly like, almost myoptically like focused on music my whole life in a way, you know, at least since I was about 16, you know. So for a good 21 years now, I've been very focused on like writing songs, and I've written like ever since then. I've been writing like maybe 40 songs a year at, you know, at a pretty good clip, you know,
Yeah.
for all that time. And it's like I've always had very like kind of concise philosophies, or at least like I wouldn't say hatred for different like other philosophies of music, but like I would definitely reject like full-heartedly like things that like I was taking like a music theory class, and I'm like, no, none of this is real. Like it's all emotion based, you know.
Yeah.
But I did take, at least when I was in bands where I had other people playing with me, you know, I was like, okay, in order to keep these other musicians on the mark with me, I'm gonna at least know what the 1 and the 5 note are, you know, like in all of my songs, you know. I know what those are, and I base everything off that. All the other notes are gonna be completely subjective to whatever I pick those notes to be, you know. In the context of the melody, in the context of the riff, and that's how I wrote music for a long time. And I still have that with me, but it's gone through so many transformations.
Yeah.
Especially if like, cause that was like when I was trying to get really progressive with punk rock and just like go far out on a limb and like see what I'm like, okay, what's an interval? Like where are we at? You know, like what's the interval of the Star Trek theme song? I'm gonna rip that off real quick and see where that goes or whatever.
Yeah.
And to the point where you get like that band breaks up and then you're lost, and then like we were in the drum circle forever, and that like that brought me back to zero, you know. Like for real, man. Like I got way far out there, and then drum circle happens, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just yelling words on the spot and like drum. Man, you remember all that shit?
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't seem real, you know. I'm like, come here and know me better, man. Like that, like catchphrases were happening and shit, man. It was weird. But that was such a fun time. I just remember meeting you that first night, and Mike Capusta and Tom, and like we were all just like right there, and like at the end of the day, like Mike is like as a turtle with his hands sticking out of his like shoulders. I'm like, how is this real? Like, what is happening right now? Like, this is something good though. This is like we need to hold on to this. I think, you know,
right.
It was awesome.
That's funny.
But that musically, that brought me back to zero for sure. You know? And then it was so cool, like like just jumping on and just holding on and taking that ride of like, okay, and then there's Amy, and then there's Johnny, and then there's like people who are just around town.
Yeah.
And like, let's make some old timey music, you know, like or like weird gypsy music, or you know, like all these like real fundamental chord progressions and melodies, and like
Yeah.
and that was like the next rebuilding of my like patterns again, you know.
Yeah.
Until like I did that, and then like that was the whole Grandpa BB thing, and then I was like, okay, well, how can I make this mine, and how can I make it punk rock, and like, you know,
Yeah.
and still include all these people,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
That was so much fun, man. Like
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful process.
yeah, and that's, I definitely look at the successional,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
building of a rebuilding, and like it's like you build one thing and then it crumbles, and then you just start rebuilding from the bottom again, you know. And that's so many different art forms, and just the way that the waves work, just the way patterns in nature work, you know, like even like the crops here will grow and die and like come back to life again, and you learn that like when you're playing a set in front of people, how do people's emotions run best. Like I have to have enough patience for myself to like not play fast 100 miles an hour all the time, you know, because like I will do that, you know. Like I know myself and I do that. I've done that for years, you know. But now I'm like more understanding and I'm trying to build that patience in myself and write slower songs, and like really like, okay, we're gonna start it high and then we're gonna bring it down, and then we're gonna slowly build it up with the next one, and then we're gonna peak again, you know. And then this next song will feel like it falls down, but it's really peaking anyway. So, you know, like I'm just like describing my set list right now. Woo! I've been almost there the whole time. Yeah. Falling over in this chair to the cattails,
Right,
man.
to the corn dogs.
Hell yeah, man. This has been a really great interview, man, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're able to come out.
Yeah.
And I think it's always fun being here during like the heat of the day. There's a certain feel to it. Then once the sun starts to go down and clouds come, just
it's like a relief.
Yeah, it's like a complete change, and it's same space, but it's just cool to see it transform through the day.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we got to sit through the transformation of this space as well.
Yeah, yeah, because it was impressive at a point. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this for an hour right now. This is
Yeah.
I'm just dehydrating myself with
Right,
cups of coffee and like.
Welcome to the world of farming.
Yeah.
This is what our human ancestors have been going through for
12,000 years.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I sometimes try to ground myself into that. And like I get inspired a lot through the Mexican milpa system and the way the campesinos have farmed in Mexico for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And just
yeah.
like it is a struggle, like being in the heat, the work that has to be put through, but it's just this way of connecting with so many different people, and just people in general. Like everyone go back a certain amount of time had to be like, you couldn't just remove yourself from the environment. Like
No.
You were thoroughly in it.
Yeah.
So if like it's super hot and I'm struggling, I try to remember that and be connected with that to push through it.
Yeah, you reminded me of a couple things. Like I love you were talking about like early Central America and South America, kind of like agriculture starting there.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it started around the same time as Mesopotamia on the other side of the world, right?
I don't know the exact details of that, but the like corn came from Mexico and like Central American area.
Tomatoes and squash and certain forms of beans.
Right, yeah. And so like they have a whole system of agriculture that developed around those crops where they're not isolated from each other, and they grow together within an ecosystem. So their milpa system is like growing the corn and beans and squash, but also having chilies, tomatoes, different like fruit trees and avocados, nopales, the cactuses, and just like all these foods within this crafted, stewarded ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so they go out and they work there, and their grocery store is that.
Yeah.
So it's like that idea of that food forest also is kind of pattern within that.
Yeah.
Which again is just how indigenous peoples have fed themselves.
Yeah.
Us Europeans or descendants of the Western world like to think that we came up with these really cool ideas.
Right.
And
they've been existing for a long time. Yep. Or like how we think about Ireland and potatoes and Italy and tomatoes kind of thing. Like those never existed there until 500 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
European contact with the Americas. Yeah. Italian cooking did not have tomatoes.
You're seeing an old world that really only evolved over 300 years between like, you know, 1500s and like the 1800s, and then you started seeing worldwide trade more.
Right. Yeah.
You know, well, to a greater extent, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so wild. And then even to the Americas, when they like, I always know about like the corn, and then you have the bean vines grow up the corn and all that.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of like symbiotic kind of thing happening there.
Right.
And like, I love how like the tastes, like between like all the American foods, like where they all came from, like the tastes all go together amazing as well. You know, like the avocado to the tomato and the beans and the corn and like.
Right. Yeah.
Man, that's such an interesting combination. How those evolved together like that too, or how we picked them to domesticate those plants.
Yeah.
Because we probably only had so much energy as a human species to like really cultivate really well or domesticate certain species of plants throughout.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really interesting too, and to get to a whole different level, right? 12,000 years ago, when we think that agriculture first started, and you think about like how much collective cooperation was needed between humans, you know, and how that even started, you know, like, because I mean, I'm sure that up to that point, like, and still happening today, you know, people will be like, oh, well, they're from a different town, or hey, you're not from around here, are you? You know, that kind of like distrust of in a tribal sense, you know, that I'm sure came from like the ideas of like wizards and superstitions, but probably were actually just like, well, they have a different set of immunity than I do, so they're going to bring different germs and maybe kill a bunch of us on accident, you know.
Right.
But we think that it's like gods or something, you know. It's super crazy. Like, we don't know any of the like details of that whole like, you know, happening, but I like to think about it a lot.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating.
And then the stories, those particular stories themselves, like the superstitions and the more kind of almost religions that are just like, oh, well, there was a white fox that we seen and we were really thirsty, and this white fox led us to this river one day, and now our little tribe reveres the white fox as kind of like our savior, but like we don't go around telling people about it, you know. We're not you know, evangelizing. This is a whole different kind of idea of what religion is, and just being connected to the spirituality of the world in a way, you know, and just having those symbols that just kind of like appeared to you, you know, and you're just taking them as a sign almost, you know. And because you have no idea really, you don't know what microbes are, you don't know what the fungus is in the soil, like everything that we've talked about like in this podcast, they had no idea about any of that, you know. And so that's an entirely different kind of world. And like how you build, you basically just build a fictional story to represent these things that we're talking about in a grander scale. And then you had like the shaman who are tripping on peyote and like mushrooms that are trying to see visions of these things and like really seeing through nature and trying to describe people those things, those systems that they're like really recognizing. They're like, okay, you know, like, and they're probably fundamental, you know, but he's trying to like relate it to other people through, you know, massive stories that just got passed down, you know, for generations, and the shaman know those stories, and they're like trying to put it together with the stories that they see in the natural world. Man, like I love that kind of collective, you know, understandings. You know,
it's amazing
how we got here, I guess, basically. Yeah, I don't know. Just to bring it to a conclusion here. And we figured out the whole world. There you go.
Right, yeah.
Just take this podcast, put it in your pocket, save it for later, show all your friends, you know?
Right, yeah. But yeah, no, thanks for stopping by the farm and talking with me. This has been great.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun, man. Yeah, podcasting is going to become one of my favorite pastimes, you know?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I guess we'll wrap it up.
Yes, thank you.
Cheers.
Fun.
Yeah.